Hello everyone, today's poem is Xiaoya, 渐渐之石, a Xiaoya poem from the Book of Songs. I will use this poem and this video as the last video in the portion of Xiaoya. We have gone through many poems in Xiaoya and this is the last one in my video. And then I will going to explain and illustrate the poems in 大雅, the big Ya. This poem is a very typical 3-paragraph poem, and the situation described is very, very typical, very simple as usual. But very likely this poem was written in the late period of the West Zhou dynasty, and we can see from this poem that the writing techniques and the vocabularies has became more complicated. Oftenly, with some of the allusions is hard to understood by today's people or even by the people several hundred years after them in the Han dynasty. So there's a lot of the arguments in this poem. Another very outstanding feature in this poem is with some of the hesitation, with a little bit homesick. So basically it's a negative mood, but mixed with very strong and positive spirits together. So we can see this in another poem I like very much, 车侠. It has the very famous words, 高山仰止, 景行行止. So that poem is quite similar to this poem as well. So it's about the sadness of farewell. But that poem, the poem of 车侠, also mixed with very, very strong positive spirits in that very negative and sad situation. So we can compare these two poems and feel the similarity, the mood, the background between this, or differences between these two poems. By perfectly mixed the two different feelings and situations in one short poem, this also reflected the very sophisticated writings of the Zhou people, and this doesn't appears in the poems which were likely was written in the early stage of the Zhou dynasty. So in my opinion, this poem should or very likely was written in the late period of the West Zhou dynasty. So another background for this poem is about a war. So it writes something about when they started their journey to the battlefield, to the east states. So they travel a long way to the battlefields, and finally they just stopped by a big river, and at the moment, just aside the big river, the poet wrote down this poem. And you can see from this map, the army was summoned and made up in the capital area, and then they marched eastward. So you can see there are huge, big mountains alongside their journey until to this place. The huge mountain and the rock on the mountain resembles the views of their hometown, and finally resembles their homesick. And at the end of this poem, they reached to a place with vast plain. At the riverside, there is no mountains. The feelings is exotic. So just imagine you are a soldier, you are a general, you lead a bunch of your people to the enemy states, and finally everything turns to so differently to that of your hometown. So just try to feel the situation by yourself. Okay, the first paragraph. 渐渐之石，维其高矣. The huge rock changed gradually, and it was so up and high over there. 山川悠远，维其劳矣. The mountains and the rivers, it's so long and it's getting more remote, far away. It's because they are so busy and tiresome. 劳 means busy out, very tiresome. So how could the mountain and the river be tiresome and busy out? No, it's not. We can see who is busy out, who is tiresome. The third pair of sentences is 武人东征，不皇朝矣. The warrior march eastward, and he has no time to attend to the central government, to attend the meeting in the central government. Okay, I'll give you the explanation to the whole paragraph. The first pair of sentences actually remind me another poem, 结南山，结比南山，为时炎炎. So it's almost identical to this poem, but they has a little bit different writings. 为时炎炎 is describe a very static image of that huge rock, and in this poem, the rock is changing gradually. So actually, it's not the rock what's changing, it's the image in the eye of the poet is changing, because this poet was going far away eastward, and the huge rock on the high mountain, which is a very familiar image when he was in his home, and that rock became smaller and smaller when he was going further away. And the second pair of sentences also use these techniques. It says the mountain and the river is sort of the tiresome and busy out. Actually, it's not. It's the poet, all the warriors, the soldiers who are marching eastward are busy out. They are tiresome. And the last sentence actually reveal the who is the poet. He is an officer in the central government, and very likely he is one of the major generals to lead this army. 皇 is a long word which means time. 不皇 means it's no time. And sometimes maybe you can feel a little bit similar situation or feelings when you travel around the world, that when you get off the plane, get off the train, and when you look around, the people are a little bit unfriendly, and the views, the buildings are so differently from your hometown. So what do you feel at the moment? 朝 in the early morning. While in the poems in the Book of Songs, most of the time it means to attend a meeting of the central government in the morning. So it's a very special and delicate word, and we see this word many times in the Book of Songs. So he has no time to attend the meeting in the central government. Tell us two things. the poet is a senior officer in the central government, and now he was serving as a general in the army. Very likely, the huge rock referred in this poem is the mountain of Hua, the 5 sacred mountain in China. And in the Zhou dynasty, it's a very, very famous mountain as well. It was so called as Yue. So in the Zhou dynasty, the mountain was called Yue, was only Hua mountain. And to the west is the hometown of the Zhou people, and the landscape, the views are almost identical in this basin, roughly 400 kilometers length basin. In the south is the South Mountain, in the north is the North Mountain, and in the center is the river of Wei. So they share a same view in this area, and this is a home place for the Zhou people. And to the east of the Hua mountain, it's still a lot of the mountains alongside, but it's a small valley when they traveled to the east, and the river became the Yellow River alongside. So it's something described in the second paragraph. Let's see. The second paragraph. 渐渐之石，维其卒矣. That huge rock changed gradually, and finally it disappeared. 卒 means finish off, ended. Here it refers the view or the rock could not be seen anymore. Okay, the second pair of sentence. 山川悠远，跷其没矣. The mountains and the rivers are very long and getting more remote, more far away. And finally, it disappeared as well. So which place the mountains and the rivers disappeared? Just look at the map. It's here. From this place to the east is a big plain with a little hill. It's no big mountains, and there is no big rivers. Chuan refers the big valley, big river. So in the second paragraph, basically it tells two things. The rock very likely still refers to the huge mountain. It's a rock mountain. It's a mountain on one piece of huge rock, the Hua mountain. And from the Hua mountain to the east, there are still mountains, but very quickly they cannot see the Hua mountain. And through hundreds of miles to the east, finally they walked to the place of a big plain, and there's no mountains, the huge mountains, the big rivers, which means the Yellow River in the second paragraph. They all disappeared, and they are reaching to a place totally different from their home place. A very beautiful, fertile basin. In the center of the basin, many small rivers with big river of Wei or Yellow River. And to the south, to the north, there are big, huge mountains. And this foreign place is just plain, big plain of earth. The third pair of sentence. 武人东征，不皇出矣. The warriors marching eastward, and they are so busy, they have no time to do other things, but they are out of home finally. So you can see the Zhou people, they treat the same environment at their home, especially in the midway here is their east capital. So just imagine when they marching, they form the army, start their march. It's from the Xi'an city today. They are in a big fertile basin, and to the north, to the south is huge mountains, and they marched along the Wei River. It's a big river, and then when they passed the Hua mountain, the road became narrow. It's just like a valley. They are walking, marching in a valley, but still in the north, in the south is big mountains, and they are marching along the Yellow River. This is all the things they are quite familiar, and then they were passed by the east capital, Luoyang city today. In that time, they were called as Changzhou. It's treated as the east capital, a very key city for the Zhou people. So it's still their homeland, their hometown. The environment is quite similar. The yellow, fertile yellow earth, and they are surrounded north and south by the mountains. They are along the big river, Yellow River. And in the second paragraph, finally, they reached a place, a big plain of earth with no mountains, with no big rivers. So it's so exotic, and of course, I think they feel the hostile, or they are very, very cautious at this place. Just imagine if you are a soldier in this army, or if you are the general who accept the mission from the king, accept the order from the king. You have a mission, you have an order on your shoulder, and of course you are responsible for all the life and death for some of the thousands or maybe several 10,000 people under you. So what do you feel? So far, there's no big arguments in the first and second paragraph. The way of the marching is the story by me, but the explanation to the sentence and the words, there's no big arguments through the history. The most argued paragraph in the third paragraph, and it's still so mysterious today. Okay, the third paragraph. 有豕白蹢，烴涉波矣。豕 is pig, it's very clear. 白蹢 is not so clear. Most of the explanation said the D refers to the feet of the pig. So there is one or several pig with white feet. 烴涉波矣. 烴, most of the explanation explained as many. So with the first sentence, this pair of sentence means many pigs with white feet. They are cross the river, cross the wave of the river. Anyhow, this sentence totally, this explanation totally conflicted with the second pair of sentence. And so the second pair of sentence means 月离于毕，俾滂沱矣. So the general explanation refers the moon was left the stellar of B, and the stellar is a ancient Chinese stellar, not the Western stellar. B is one of the 28 stellars of that. So this is on the heaven. Something on the heaven happens, and because of this movement of the moon in the heaven, this symptom or this phenomenon. The heaven let it rains heavily, rains cat and dog. 滂沱 refers to the heavy rains. So just imagine, if it rains heavily, how could they cross a river, even a small river? It's the flood, especially in this place. They are just away from the mountain areas, and this areas is the flooded area. Through the history, it's a very, very dangerous place when the river floods. There is a very interesting explanation for that pig with white feet, and it says this scenario is from 八卦 or 周易, is from the 44th 卦 of Go. So the explanation to this 卦 is 藟石伏之竹, a very weak female pig is walking back and forth. So this pig was in a big hesitation, has nowhere to go. So this also in somewhat compliance to the situation of this poem, that the third paragraph basically tells us the situation is very hard. Either it's raining or it's some of the very big flooded river, some of the very hard obstacle ahead. So the army, the general, the poet, they feel the hesitation and they don't know how to do for the next step. So in this way, it could be one of the situations, especially there are some of the very important words in this poem is from the 周易 or 八卦. So the 渐渐之石, so in the 周易, 渐 is one of the 卦. It's the 53 卦 of 渐. And the main explanation for this 卦 is on the mountain there is wood. So this is if we cross-check with this poem with the explanation in 周易, it's a big conflict. In the 周易, it tells us there a wood on the mountain, and in this poem there is rock on the mountain. So it's not something is conflicted or something is not right. So also this also complies to the mood or situation in this poem as well, because the feeling of the poet or the soldiers, they are so homesick. Anyhow, they had to move forward away from their hometown to fulfill their duty, to achieve the task assigned by the king. And also the words in this poem look very positive, because the poet was always looking to the high mountains, and he always looking to something very, very far away. 渐渐之石，维其高矣. He's always looking to something very, very high, and he looks far forward. So this is the vision, a great vision. So this is quite positive, just like I mentioned the poem 车峡 高山仰止 景行行止. So you can feel the atmosphere, you can feel the feeling. It's so positive and strong and with great vision. So normally we think a person with that big grand vision is the big boss, is the most prestigious person, the Lord, of that time, either a king or the most prestigious state's lord. 月离于毕. So this is about the stellar in the heaven. Anyhow, the character Li is one of the name in 周易. It's the 30 gua in 周易, which means the sun and moon was shining above on the heaven. It looks like it does not comply to the situation in this point. Anyhow, we can see very likely in one or two sentences, 周易, the image described in 周易 was applied in this poem. And also the poet was very keen to the heaven, to watch the stellar. The people observed the stellar, the movement of stellar, either is the king or either is a very, very knowledgeable senior officer. So we can see this poet is very, very knowledgeable, and he was in a very high level, could be the most senior people in this army or even in the Zhou country. And in my opinion, he's the general of this army. Okay, let's review the third paragraph with my new findings. First thing first, 有豕白蹢 is very clear. The pig with white feet. 征 in the book of Science is always about sacrifice to make a ceremony to the heavens. 征, the original meaning means the flavor go upward. The flavor from the food, from the sacrifice, burned or boiled. And the flavor go upwards means the flavor goes to the heaven, to their dead ancestors. And that's the meaning for a sacrifice, to offer food, to offer everything to their ancestors. So here it tells us very clearly the pig was offered as the sacrifice, and it's not a big sacrifice because they use the pig. The most grand ceremony or sacrifice was by offering the bull, using pig, a small livestock, as the sacrifice. Tell us very clearly it's not a big deal, it's not a big ceremony at these circumstances. Anyhow, we don't know why they make this offering. They sacrifice the pig to the heaven. Could be to cross the river, or could to pray the victory for their battle afterwards. Anyhow, we have no idea. So let's just strict follow the sentence of this poem. 铮至波矣. So they sacrifice the small pig, and they want to cross the Bo River. So Bo is a name of the river. Anyhow, this river changed quite deal, and the name changed some 2,000 years ago after this poem wrote. And later the river was called 沙河 or 引河. And from the most ancient classic history book, 尚书, we know that this is the main river in this area, and this river was called as Bo. So 涉波is quite clear, cross the Bo River. And very likely the sacrifice of that pig is to pray to the river to help their victory, or help them to cross the river safely. The next sentence, 月离于毕, the moon left the stellar of B. There's also a huge argument on this description, not on the symptom or the phenomenon, but it's on why the poet wrote this sentence. But from my point of view, in the time of Zhou dynasty, whenever they talk about the stars, either it's about timing or either it's about the fate that the heaven indicated to the people by the phenomenon showed on the heaven, by the star, by the stellar. And here I think it's about the timing. And I can introduce, if you have the interest on the stellars, there's a very, very nice software, Stellarium. I checked the Stellarium. So around a year, the stellar of B only show up in the heaven, on the heaven from the mid-November to the early April, or sometimes late March. So basically, it's the late autumn to the early spring. So this time, normally there's not much rain in this area. And so the general explanation for the next sentence, 俾滂沱矣, which means make it raining cats and dog, of course doesn't make sense at all. And I also checked the classic literature. So before the Han Dynasty, or even in the Han Dynasty included, when the article or poem used the word of 滂沱, it always refers to the river. The wave of the river is huge and strong. Never refers to the rains. It rains cats and dogs. No, it's not. It's describing the river was abundant of water, and the water is very harsh. It rush very, very dangerously. So this makes sense. The general stood at the bank of that Bo River. The river was dangerous, was abundant of dangerous water. So he just wondered and hesitated, and he tried to make sacrifice to the river to help them, to bless them to cross the river as soon as possible and safely, because he was on a military duty. The timing is the most important thing. The poet emphasized the timing, the urgency in all the three paragraphs. 不皇朝矣, 不皇出矣, 不皇他矣. So the repeating makes this urgency the most urgent. And there's a very, very interesting classic literature about the Wu Wang, the second king of Zhou dynasty. He defeated the previous dynasty, the Shang dynasty. And when the historical literature described or recalled these events, this most important battle for the Zhou dynasty, it listed some of the key stellars, where this stellar is at, where this stellar is at, where is the moon at, where is that stellar at. He listed 3 or 4 stellars to indicate, first thing first, the timing. So what timing the king chose to have the battle with the Shang king. And some of the people think the heaven always is the indication to the fate of the people on the earth. Anyhow, another some other people point out the phenomenon or the stellars indicated by this historical record shows it's not a good sign for the Zhou king, for Wu Wang, to do this battle. So anyhow, the timing, the stellar for the timing is sound and makes sense, that's for sure. So I went back to the software Stellarium and I simulate the several months when the B stellar was in the heaven, and I found out the first encounter, the moon encounter with the B stellar in the late November is always a full moon, 1 day, at most 1 day's difference from the full moon. So it's always a full moon, and then it became a more eclipsed moon when the moon encounter with the B stellar. So roughly from the November to the early April or to the late March. And then I checked roughly 10 years of this phenomenon, and it's always like this. In the November, when the moon first encountered with the B stellar, it's always a full moon or almost a full moon. And then the next time, when the 29 days later, when the B stellar encounter with the moon again, it's an eclipsed moon. And the next month, it became more eclipsed. So I checked roughly 10 years of this phenomenon in the last 100 years. And then I checked to some of the several years, roughly 3,000 years ago in the West Zhou dynasty. It shared the same rule that the first encounter in November, and the moon is full moon. So if that software is accurate, I think we can conclude it that some 3,000 years ago, this poet, this general, he was writing this poem in the late November. So one more thing is, when the ancient Chinese mentioned the moon, it's always a full moon, unless he mentioned it's a eclipsed moon. So here it mentioned the moon, it should be a full moon. So I think my conclusion is very, very solid. This poem was writing this poem in the late November, when the full moon first encountered and left the B stellar. You can check the two pictures. One is before the moon meet the stellar of B, and the other is 1 day after the moon left the B stellar. So with this description, the poet gave us a very, very delicate date of a year that he was writing this poem. The water in the river was the most abundant in the autumn's time. We have a proof by the very famous article by 庄子，秋水时至，百川贯河，径流之大，两驷朱牙之间，不变牛马。So this is the best proof to that time. Even today, in the autumn's time, the river in the North China was the most abundant of water, and thus it also proved this poem was written in the late November, and the river was so abundant of water, and is so dangerous with huge waves. 俾滂沱矣. So 俾 here is a long word of 俾. Over there, the river was so dangerous. The big wave was so dangerous over there. So that's the explanation for the second pair of the third paragraph. And the last sentence is so simple. 武人东征，不皇他矣. The warriors march eastward, and they have no time to do other things. Okay, that's for today. It takes so many time for me to dig out those things, the stars, the rivers, the pigs, the 周易, the fortune teller things. And that's all the things very, very critical for the Zhou people. Anyhow, we are so unfamiliar for us. So that's the most big obstacles for us to read the poems in the Book of Songs. And for us, it's the most difficult things to understand the things in the Book of Songs. What do you think? Okay, that's for today. Bye-bye.